Indigenous filmmakers in Canada challenge harmful colonial stereotypes and reclaim agency through cinema, acknowledging the truth of Indigenous experience without white settler bias or manipulation. This visual essay explores how their work resists erasure and recenters the Indigenous voice. Canada's history is one of settler colonialism, land theft, cultural erasure, and systemic violence. These injustices were not only enforced through laws and institutions, but reinforced through visual media. Indigenous people were pushed to the margins, not just of land, but of image, memory, and voice. What we saw on screen told us who mattered and who did not. For decades, Indigenous people have been misrepresented by colonial and mainstream cinema. Through harmful stereotypes like the noble savage, the Indian princess, and the stoic warrior, these stories erase Indigenous complexity and humanity. These portrayals justified colonial violence and reinforced white savior narratives, casting Indigenous people as either helpless or dangerous.
These tropes reduce Indigenous characters to one-dimensional figures that serve the need of non-Indigenous narratives, either as mystical guides, tragic victims, or romanticized rebels. Such portrayals not only distort history, but also contribute to the ongoing marginalization of Indigenous voices. By centering right perspectives and ignoring real Indigenous experiences, mainstream films have upheld colonial myths and silenced stories of resistance, survival, and cultural strength. Reclaiming Indigenous narratives through film is not just about representation, it's about restoring agency, truth, and cultural continuity.
Popular culture shaped damaging myths. Take Pocahontas. The romanticized tale of a young girl and her so-called savior hides the real history of violence and exploitation. A child, forced into an adult narrative, becomes a symbol of availability and submission, fueling the harmful trope of the hypersexualized Indigenous woman. The white savior emerges, not as protector, but as eraser of truth. This was the unfortunate truth for many young Indigenous women. They were sought after. This fictional being, the hypersexualized, available for the white man's taking, Indian princess. This painted Indigenous women as an object that needed saving. In the early days of film, Western movies were the main Indigenous representation on screen. They were portrayed as hostile Indians and usually pitted against the cowboys, played by big names like John Wayne. They were used as merely a body for the Wild West heroes to slaughter.
Wait! There's so much we can teach you. We've improved the lives of savages all over the world.
Savages?
Not that you're a savage.
Just my people.
No. Listen, that's not what I meant. Let me explain.
Let go!
No, I'm not letting you leave. Look, don't do this. Savage is just a word, a term for people who are uncivilized.
Like me.
This kind of misrepresentation wasn't just in the past. It continued well into the 2000s and beyond, as seen in The Lone Ranger, where Johnny Depp's portrayal of Tonto relied on outdated and offensive stereotypes. Cigarettes, toys, nursery rhymes, advertisements, cars, summer camp, Boy Scouts, PSAs, monuments, television, art, missiles, Halloween, cartoons, music festivals, and of course, Native mascots. Hollywood has made over 4,000 films depicting Native Americans. Unsurprisingly, an overwhelming majority of these representations were created by non-Native people. And one thing these representations often share is a similar era. They're mascots and historical figures, images of people that used to exist, people that were primitive, violent, indulgent, and mythical.
When John Ford and John Wayne and Randolph Scott et al. Were massacring Indians with single shots.
Turn around, dirt. On!
And that was in the late 40s. And I was in elementary school in Vallejo, California. Because of those movies, my brother and I were the only Indians in the neighborhood and in town and in school. We had to fight our way out of those.
The first wave of Indigenous cinema emerged in the 1960s and 70s, led by pioneers like Alanis Obamsawin. Her film, Kanastake, 270 Years of Resistance, documented the 1990 Oka crisis from within the Mohawk community, offering a raw and truthful perspective missing from the mainstream media.
The second wave brought forward new filmmakers like Lisa Jackson and Jeff Barnaby, artists blending genre, animation, and experimental styles with lived Indigenous experience.
According to Bertrand, on page 4 of her article about Canadian Indigenous cinema, they have used different genres such as documentary, fiction, animation, and experimental films to bring to life the testimonies and modern-day stories of their peoples. Again, through these elements, oral tradition is put at the forefront. Jackson's Suckerfish explores intergenerational trauma through hybrid visuals. Barnaby's Rhymes for Young Ghouls turns the horror of residential schools into a powerful act of resistance. Both waves mark a reclaiming of Indigenous power through film. Today's Indigenous cinema is not just about pushing back. It's about holding space for memory, language, and futurity. Projects like the Wapikoni Mobile show youth reclaiming stories with cameras in hand. Healing and resistance go hand in hand. These aren't just films. They're acts of cultural continuity where sacred tradition meets modern media. Film becomes a space of resistance. As seen in the works of Obamsawin, Jackson, and Nero, Indigenous cinema documents injustice, but also dreams of change. These films are political, they are spiritual, they are alive.
Contemporary Indigenous cinema is more than just resistance. It is cultural continuity. These films preserve language, memory, and intergenerational knowledge through visual and oral storytelling. It is telling their truth from their perspective without anyone changing it.
Projects like the Wapikoni Mobile empower Indigenous youth to turn oral traditions into visual art. Ceremony and remembrance are framed through Indigenous worldviews, centering healing, not victimhood. By reclaiming the lens, Indigenous filmmakers disrupt settler colonial narratives and assert their right to be seen, heard, and remembered on their own terms. These films are not just cultural texts, they are acts of resistance, survival, and nationhood. This visual essay was created by Emily Maynard, Kaylee Bauer, Micah Marnier, and Sanapreet Kaur Patwalia. We honor the storytellers who came before us and those continuing to shape the future of Indigenous cinema.